Welcome to this week's episode of the WhatsOnStage Podcast with me, Alex Wood.
And me, Sarah Crompton.
I had a bit of a nightmare, Sarah, when I woke up at 7 this morning and left the house.
Why, Alex?
I looked down and realised that I, with blue trousers and a blue and white stripy shirt, had managed to dress as the Argentinian flag ahead of tonight's press night for Evita at the London Palladium.
You're blending perfectly, and you'll get covered in blue and white streamers, so nobody will notice that you've already done the hard work.
I do cringe a little bit. It's like doing musical theatre cosplay, but dressing as a flag.
Nobody will notice. Yeah. That press night is going to be mayhem.
Well, both before and during, given the scenes outside the London Palladium.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. I feel I'm getting a bit soft this week because I keep going to shows and bursting into tears and then giving it 5 stars. And in light of our last conversation about standing ovations, I have stood up as well, which is really indicates that I'm getting very weak at the knees. It's been a great week, great couple of weeks for shows opening and culminating in Evita this week. And we have talked a lot about Evita, but I think it is the show that everybody is going to be talking about all summer.
And beyond, I expect.
And beyond,
I think people will be talking about Rachel Zegler performing on the Palladium balcony for years and decades to come. Because
it's an extraordinary thing, isn't it? She has had such a scummy year one way and another. You know, she had all that controversy around Snow White, for better or worse, and she really seemed to be struggling. And then she comes over to London and she's literally singing to adoring crowds outside a theatre every night. And it's totally transformed her reputation, I think, and let things focus back on what she's so utterly brilliant at, which is as a singer and actor. I mean, her voice is astonishing, really just so pure and so amazing. And here we are talking about Evita again.
So we're going to be, that wave of jubilation that you've experienced over the last 2 weeks has prompted the question, have we found the show of the summer?
Yeah.
And not just Evita, I think there's plenty that we can talk about on that front. So it's really, we're going to start there and then move over to some other surprises that you might have encountered along the way. But I mean, what was your main takeaway going into that production, or what were you expecting that then didn't happen, or something you weren't expecting that did happen?
The lineaments of the production were set in 2019 when Jamie Lloyd directed this at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. And it has changed, but it hasn't changed so dramatically that you don't recognise it. Some of the things that happen there, like people being shot and balloons exploding and blue ticker tape coming out, were all in place there. The bleacher set, the simplicity of it, the way that they use light to silhouette the choreography. But it's as if it's expanded its lungs to fill the space of the London Palladium. It's got such confidence in its power to tell a story. And also it has got, I think, at its centre now, 2-star performances. I think Rachel Zegler is extraordinary. I also think that Diego Andres Rodriguez, who plays Che, and who it's astonishingly, this is his second, as people who have listened to our previous podcast interview with him will know, this is his second professional show. He started on Broadway and he's now in the West End. And it's a performance of extraordinary charisma. He's unbelievable on a stage, and assurance and real power, I think, and it balances her beautifully. So you've got the cynical commentator and the character progressing through her life, and it's a wonderful.
We're in that fortunate position that we've both seen the show, because I caught it slightly earlier than you did and also adored it and was waiting with bated breath to see whether or not you also were going to be waxing lyrical on this episode. Thankfully, if one of us had hated it and the other one had loved it, it would probably make for a slightly more dramatic, intense discussion.
We are recording this ahead of the reviews coming out, as again, see previous pod, but I think people will like it. There will be, I feel there will be some naysayers, which maybe will be around how loud it is. It is very loud. And maybe how stripped back it is, because people do always like a dressed up Evita.
There's the argument that it does sacrifice some of that narrative clarity. There's a lot going on that is alluded to in a very abstract way. So I think if you don't know the story of Evita well, then you'll probably sort of pick up what the general vibe is, but you might not know the intricacies of the way he's the Argentinian state was completely overhauled by the Perons in the late 1940s or early 1950s. Around then. The fact that I don't know shows again clearly the production wasn't.
It's post-war.
Post-war, exactly. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. I think what Jamie Lloyd is doing is he doesn't really care about that pinpoint sort of like hyper-realistic accuracy for the majority of the show. In a way, what he's created with this Bleachers set is more of a meditation on what an icon's legacy will be. And you kind of have, at the start, when Evita comes out of this smoke onto this bare stage, introduced by Che, in the midst of her own funeral, Jamie Lloyd sets up this sort of purgatorial space where she is looking back on her own life, reflecting on where she's come from. So it's almost like two ghosts orbiting each other, fighting the same fight on a stage together, Che and Vita. And along a lot of the way through the show, they are sort of wrestling a microphone out of each other's hands, like who has control of this narrative. That for me works really, really well, because you only really get the hyper-realistic version of Eva Peron at one, maybe 2 points in the entire show, one being the live stream and then the second being as she dies. So it's a commentary on what it means to be an icon versus an infamous Machiavellian figure, I think. And that's succulent. That's great for a musical to be able to do that whilst also having beautifully realised musical numbers from choreographer Fabian Aloise and incredible performances from some rising star talents.
I want to come back to Fabian Aloise because I think the choreography is astonishing. But I think you're making a really interesting point, and obviously yours is a sophisticated interpretation of what's going on. And I think it is absolutely right that the microphone passing is so clearly a device to make it clear that it is a meta commentary on a life, on a musical, on politics. And I think what gets lost with Jamie Lloyd, I am really, and it's not just because I've interviewed him recently and like him very much, I am really an admirer of his work because I think he's somehow got the ability to stand outside what he's doing. And it gets slightly lost in how big and amplified and full of effects his shows have become. He's got a very clear vision for each show that he puts on. And if you think that when he really rose to fame was this Pinter season, where he took all the short plays and put them back in the canon. I mean, that season was an astonishing achievement because those plays had always been regarded as less good than Pinter's longer plays. And he took every single one of them, the radio plays and the tiny 10-minute monologues, and he built them into a season and made you see them in a different way. And I do think that clarity of thought is key to understanding Jamie. I think he's a really, really good director. There's a tiny bit of me that wants this to be, for a bit, his last show using white lights and microphones and film, and move on to do something else. And in fact, when I interviewed him, I said, will you do that? Is this it? Is this where we are now? And he said, oh no, if something different comes up, I will do that. And I do trust him in a way to do that because I think he is constantly challenging himself on the basis of how he can make theatre alive, how he can bring works that are not necessarily adored. It's quite interesting with the build-up to Evita. A lot of people have been saying, oh, it's not my favourite Lloyd Webber show. I think most people's favourite Lloyd Webber show is probably Phantom, which has got the best music. I mean, it's got the most lush music, Phantom. But he has taken Evita and turned it into a masterpiece, I think, really. I think the bones were there. I think Tim Rice's lyrics are brilliant. I think the music is great. I think its structure is bold. I like the idea that it was taking on a controversial figure and tackling her in a musical form. But I'm not sure that I've ever seen it revealed in this way.
If we alight on the topic of how the theatre world treats Jamie Lloyd as a director, two things stand out to me through this production of Evita. The first one is that after Romeo and Juliet and The Tempest last year, there was slight sort of, the water suddenly felt a bit choppy in terms of people like maybe Jamie Lloyd has run out of tricks. Then this year he comes back with bam, Much Ado About Nothing. Brilliant Shakespeare, probably one of the best Shakespeares he's ever done, with two of the most hyper-realised, perfect performances of Benedict and Beatrice from Tom Hiddleston and Hayley Atwell. Then you think, okay, maybe that was a fluke. Maybe we're still in the end time for this stage of Jamie Lloyd's career. Bam, Evita lands, same response. Yeah. And I just think that maybe this stripped back interpretation of classic texts has such mileage because it's what audiences want. Is they want to see shows that can so often be coated in so much baggage just released from all of that and seen anew in the 21st century in a post-COVID world as well, where everyone is trying to re-examine the realities we now face. So he can have at it. He wants my favourite Jamie Lloyd production perhaps was actually his staging of Lucy Preble's The Effect at the National Theatre. Again, completely stripped back, letting the text do the work. And I think he lets the text do the work here in Evita as well, because it's so overwhelming, some of the lyrics that Tim Rice crams into that production. But if you get rid of all the razzmatazz on the design and let's just sort of let the bodies do the talking, so much of those lyrics actually pop out to you. You actually understand this Argentina even more in the nuances that exist. So the second part of the Jamie Lloyd treatment, I guess, is also, this mirrors almost exactly Sunset Boulevard in terms of there was a lot of skepticism at the start. Ticket sales weren't sort of like straight out of the gate sell-out season. There's still £29.50 tickets available for this run in August, so before those headlines about exorbitant ticket prices come out later this year. And it's only once the reviews come in and the word of mouth spreads that the show starts selling out and becoming this juggernaut, which I think Evita's now destined to become. So it's funny in a way that people almost are expecting him not to land something, and yet he still does.
Yeah, and I don't know what that is. I mean, maybe it is because he's so successful, but there is a skepticism when it comes up. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. He is motivated with this idea that theatre should reach everybody. He is a messiah, really, for theatre because he discovered himself entirely accidentally. And he discovers it through a strange route. He has a really tough upbringing. He's completely separate from the theatre world. He said, when he actually started to study theatre in Liverpool, that everyone else had seen performances. He'd never seen anything. So he does genuinely come at it with completely fresh eyes. And then he's a quick learner and he watches everything. But he also wants people to love theatre as much as he does. And so he's an evangelist for reaching out from theatre into the world, which is why his company does always offer cheap seats. And it's why he tries to make those productions that are essentially electric. That's what they're doing. They're sending electricity from the stage out. And that's absolutely true of The Effect, which was, it's a really good but quite dense play. And he suddenly made it sizzle in ways that, by stripping everything out of it except the actors, and he's brilliant with actors on a stage. We need to come on to the balcony moment, which is part of that. Before we do that, I just want to say that Fabian Aloysi's choreography, Fabian Aloys gives a brilliant interview on a previous podcast, and I do recommend people listen to it because it's fabulous, and how he talks about his own inspirations and his own training with some of the gods of American choreography. But his choreography in that show is unbelievably clear. It isn't just movement. I've also seen this week Quadrophenia, which was a Sadler's Wells, which I really enjoyed, but doesn't communicate in the way that Alois does. He absolutely understands that if you put a diagonal line of bodies and you ask them to move in a certain way, you can tell a story. And each detail of it, I couldn't get over how he used people's arms. He shapes how they stand so that you see them differently. And of course it's energetic, and of course it's beautiful, and there's a lot of tango, very elaborate steps, but it's the dramatic structure of his choreography, I think, that's so original.
It's like watching a very kinetic chessboard in action. And
Exactly.
especially in one of the early numbers, I think it was Good Night and Thank You,
Yeah.
where Evita is sort of like nudging all of her flames out of the way as she rises to the top. It's so simply staged in terms of she just ascends from man to man, but the way that it's done is so beautifully realised. And he gets Jamie Lloyd's point about abstraction can lead to enlightenment of material. And those two work so symbiotically, almost to a point that you don't know where the directorial insight ends and the choreographical insight begins, because it's just seamless. Like in a lot of musicals, you get the scenes and then you get the numbers. In this, the two just are inexorably combined the whole way through. I think that he is marked himself probably as one of the finest choreographers willing to interpret classic musicals.
Yeah.
And I hope that pairing continues for many shows to come.
And you do have this sense that from my multiple interviews, I feel I've spent a lot of time in Jamie Lloyd world this last 6 months. And because I interviewed Tom Hiddleston and Hayley Atwell as well. And you get the sense all the time of how collaborative the room is, that's the other quality he's bringing to it, that he creates a space somehow where people can find what they're doing and what they can bring to it. And that's a gift in a director, to bring out the best in everybody, which seems to be what he has absolutely done with this musical. Let's talk about the balcony.
Yes, well, I was going to quickly mention John Clark's lighting design, because that's probably one of the other big changes versus the open air production, because the lighting rig at the Palladium is far more adept compared to Regent's Park, in that you actually have space above the stage to put lights, and he uses that to beautiful effect, just to create this sense of Argentina in the Maelstrom world. And I think A New Argentina at the end of Act 1 in particular, the way he uses those very intense red lights works really, really splendidly. I'd be loath not to mention that, because it does feel like one of the big changes versus 2019. But yes, balcony scene, which my provocation with the balcony scene would be when all these headlines blew up about, oh gosh, you don't see the biggest number of the show live in the auditorium. For me, that's only one flourish in 2.5 hours worth of directorial and choreographical flourishes that you never feel shortchanged by having it outside as an audience member watching inside. In fact, you're like, oh, you're trying something different and something new. That's very refreshing. You're not just having Zegler stood in the middle of the Palladium singing it very statically. Did you think it worked?
Totally. And I think what we, see previous podcasts, what we couldn't talk about before because we hadn't seen it, I think it's the only moment they use film. It's certainly the first moment they use film in this production. And what you didn't know was how sophisticated it is. So, in fact, what you get as an audience member inside the Palladium is that you see her face in close-up, you see the reaction of the crowd, which is brilliant. The crowd are used effectively as extras. The night I was there, he took the chorus out into the street as well. So they're at the front, sobbing, and then there's all the crowd behind, 1,000 people, I think, easily. And it's all very cleverly mixed, so it comes over her face and it feels like a moment. So you're absolutely not shortchanged inside. And you hear her with great clarity. Because I am a good journalist, Alex, I went back the following night.
I was going to say, I was very impressed with you for going back to try it outside and in. But it's a completist Evita perspective.
Completist Evita. My family thought I was mad. And I was blessed as a result with that. It was brilliant being there because you really saw how it works outside. And it is 1,000 people. You see pretty well because conveniently, as you will know, having had to block off the street outside the London Palladium for the WhatsOnStage was, there's a slight slope in it. So you can actually, it has got a rake for an audience. It's amazingly relaxed in how it's organised. I mean, it's classic that the British sometimes do things very well of not having crowd control or anything. Everybody just behaves. And you get this interesting mixture of people who've come deliberately, people who've seen the show and want to see how it works outside. There were a lot of those. People who haven't a clue what's going on but think they might as well hang around. Quite a few Rachel Zegler fans as well were turning up. It's an incredibly theatrical moment because she comes out and the crowd falls silent. And you've got this tiny little doll-like figure walking along in absolute silence because, of course, you can't hear what's happening inside the auditorium. You're hearing her one sing at that point. But outside, you've just got her walking along very, very, very quietly. And then this little figure and this little voice, much quieter. So you really have to stand and listen. And the two things were amazing. She sings it so beautifully. It's got such subtlety and delicacy how she sings it. But it really is the human voice. It's less mic'd outside and the orchestra are much quieter. So it's much more human in scale. And of course, therefore, makes that brilliant meta point about the human and the iconic, because you've got the human outside and the iconic inside the theatre. And I do think that must have been part of the appeal. And the other thing that was brilliant, we were talking about this. So I had been interviewing the crowd and asking what they thought. And
Fieldwork.
Lots of people were really interesting. But there were in front of me a husband and wife who were having an argument very similar to the argument I'd had in my own kitchen before setting out about what are we doing here? We've been standing here for an hour. Why are we here? And this woman in the end just said, it just shows the power of theatre. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't even ask her a question and she said it. And it utterly
I
does.
like to think that the production planted that person so that they would
'cause
say
you're a
that line. They're like, Sarah's coming to watch it from outside. We need to make sure she hears the right thing.
Yeah, no, but it
so
did
true.
that. And it is so true.
I was looking back on some of the sort of chart-topping successes of the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, when you could have musical stars like Michael Balls, Elaine Pages, etc., becoming national superstars, getting to number ones in the charts. That hasn't happened. But that hasn't happened for a long time, but this feels like another superstar moment for theatre. And this shows the power of theatre in order to bring crowds together to celebrate each other. And it's a whole other conversation to almost what's happening inside the auditorium. There's also the class debate about, the people, the ticketless people outside watching this very curated version of Eva Peron, whereas us, the affluent insiders, get to see the full picture. Again, possibly another meta commentary going on there. It's so succulent. It's just almost, people will probably write theses about this 7-minute outdoor balcony scene at the London Palladium, and I think that it will last longer in the zeitgeist than the actual production will by a long way. I think, we'll still be discussing this on the podcast in many years.
In 50 years' time.
I was chatting to some of the other team members about if it does go to Broadway, like where could they do that? Where can you shut down a street in New York every night in the same way you could in London? I just don't think you would even be able to. What
is it? So they don't quite shut down the street either.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily relaxed.
Yeah.
There's like one bloke. Where I was saying there was one bloke, and everyone was saying, "What's going on? What's going on?" And he was going, "Well, you just stand around, you see everything," and there wasn't any sort of.
I'm
fuss.
very intrigued by what the conversation was with Westminster Council, because when we closed it I feel like I have a unique insight after having closed the same road before. They're so meticulous about timings, barriers, security, and when I saw it, there was extra security outside. So you're like, okay, they brought in additional security
at the front. I think where I was standing was slightly on the side, and there is security, and they closed it literally for the song. So there's one of those yellow expanded barriers that goes across the road for the song, not for the build up, not for the crowd, just for the song.
So so do they stop traffic, like as in were cars not allowed to come down the
cars
street?
Probably mustn't have been coming out the other end.
So
at some point they stopped cars, because when I arrived about an hour before. Sorry, this is now descending into a podcast about traffic control, but just a small point. When I arrived, which was about an hour before, cars were still coming up.
Wow.
Yeah.
And at about a taxi outside the Palladium.
Well, there was there were taxis and everything coming up the road, and then it stopped. I guess that stopped about half an hour beforehand. But the actual real closure was very minimal.
I think we should dedicate a special WhatsOnStage Awards to the general management team that had to try and get this through Westminster Council. But yes, I think it's special, and it's nice to have this moment for theatre in the West End, which so often can feel like an exclusive club. That this production has punched through that assumption and said, no, we can actually bring theatre to the people by having our own mini West End Live every night at the London Palladium.
She is amazing as well, because there's a lot going on. There were all the rickshaws going up, and there was a police siren at one point, and of course for the people inside, she really has to keep going. She can't hesitate and I was super impressed with her and her control and the courage of that. It's hard to do that. But she's something.
She was such a coup in terms of casting. Not to apply another meta commentary to this production, but almost, I think, because of her reputation, because of the fallout from Snow White, where she, to some in the cultural sphere, has now entered like a dubious space in terms of how they treat her because of the way that Snow White had its big press palaver. To play a role like Eva Peron, who herself was controversial and had many misconceptions about her, fits so well, because you again get to play with the reality versus the perception, with a figure who is swaddled in that reality versus perception dilemma that constantly exists.
Having met her as well. Yeah. Do feel. Because of that, I do keep trying to be cynical about it. I keep trying to say it's just a gimmick and it's a marketing ploy and all those things. But it really isn't. It's something different. It is proper. And she's fabulous. She's good fun, actually, and you did feel plucky would be the word I would apply to her, and she really shows that. And it's great.
I kept waiting for her voice to break as well, because that is one of the most demanding things for any lead in a show. And she's relatively early in her live stage career. I think this is her musical theatre professional debut, because she was in Romeo and Juliet on Broadway, which I think she only sang one song or something. But to do this 8, and then I think she drops down to 7 times a week for an entire summer is incredibly impressive. Like, some of the bits in numbers like Rainbow High are just staggeringly hard, and she makes them look so easy.
So easy. I mean, Jamie did say that it was the way. I mean, he said that he just spotted her and heard the voice and has been watching her. And that's the other thing about him. I think he's good. He's got good casting people. Anyhow, we must stop talking about Evita, because
there are other shows of the summer. Yes.
Other shows are available.
Other shows of the summer then, Sarah. Where do you want to start?
Not Hercules, which is a disappointment. Cartoony, pantomime. The real surprise, I think, for everybody, even for me, who was very much looking forward to it, was Intimate Apparel at the Donmar Warehouse, starring Samira Wiley, another star. My goodness, another amazing actor. Talk about holding a theatre in the palm of your hand. What's interesting about it is a relatively old play by Lynn Nottage. It was the third she wrote, so before Sweat, which was her big breakthrough play. It's performed regularly in the United States. It's the most popular amateur show in the States. But he's done very, very rarely here. It was done at the Park Theatre. It was written in 2003 and it came here, I think, in 2013. So it took a long time. It's a play about a black seamstress in New York in 1905, based on a photograph that Lynn Nottage discovered of her great-grandmother, who was such a seamstress, who made intimate apparel, which is undergarments of fine fabric. And it was quite a good profession to have. And that's the starting point. And the other starting point, because Nottage is such a clever writer, such a good researcher, she went off and did the research and realised that not only was this better paid work than housework or field work for black women at that time, it was also more free, that it put them in touch with different sectors of society. So they were dealing with the upper class women who they dressed, they were dealing with the lower class women who they dressed in terms of the burlesque dancers, and then they were dealing with the Jewish tailors and so on. So all of that is in this play. And it's also got 2 love stories in it. Well, it's probably got more love stories, but certainly 2. And it is so beautifully directed by Lynette Linton, who, again, like Jamie Lloyd, oddly, is capable of creating such atmosphere in a theatre, that you feel you're sucked into the world. And I'd been really excited to see it, but I think most people didn't have any expectations on it at all. And it was the most engaged audience. And one man behaved very badly, and people, when one of the women stands up to him, they were going, "Go!" There were audible sighs when one of the other characters talks about how her husband's treating her. And it was just extraordinary to be in the theatre and watch this play just cast a spell over people. It really did just enamour people. So if Donmar's always hard to get tickets, but I would absolutely say get them. And it was a spontaneous standing ovation, which was very rare, and I got up.
The Lynn Nottage, Lynette Linton pairing, time and again, is proving to be one of the most fruitful for UK London theatre. It's surprising after Sweat that almost in a way people weren't expecting it to be a 5-star smash. Between that and I think, was it Clyde's that was on, last year?
Yes, which was also lovely.
Yeah, also another Lynette Linton, Lynn Nottage double act. They just keep knocking it out of the park every time. So long may that continue. I think, is Lynn Nottage now attached to the National Theatre? I think she's one of the associates there.
Yes, she is. And that's exciting because I was thinking, I want to do a podcast, so I won't do it here, but I want to talk about new writing. And I was thinking how much of my favourite new writing of the 21st century has been by women and how much of it has been by American women. And I think Nottage is an extraordinarily, a bit like Beth Steele, who's Till the Stars Come Down, we should mention in Shows of the Summer, because Till the Stars Comes Down has an electric energy and punch that will transfer to the West End. But they create worlds and families that you want to know about. You care about the outcome for these characters. And, that is part of what theatre is. However much people want to write about themes or ideas, it is also true that at its very heart, theatre is about conjuring characters. You need to know their destiny. And that's what Intimate Apparel does. And because it's actually bringing back to life a world that nobody knows much about as well. That's its other really interesting quality. You feel you've got a bit of a history lesson going on, which I loved.
It's funny to compare Evita and Intimate Apparel, as in one was a show that you went in with a huge amount of preconception placed against it. And then Intimate Apparel, you went in with nothing really to some extent, and was just completely thrown into jubilation. You texted me afterwards saying, "You have to go and see this. You have to." Complete standing ovation. Critics stunned into silence.
It was. And then actually when people wrote that there are flaws. There's a flaw in the development of one character, but it's a great piece of work. And it again, it's that sense of... it's overused as a word, but that community of theatre, of people sitting in a space listening. Because it's very simple. Beautifully lit, again. Beautifully staged.
We've been waiting for critics to have a nice time, I think, recently, in that with a few shows, I think critics have shown their teeth. The London critics have been able to show their teeth, whereas this feels like a great opportunity for critics to all stand in celebration together.
Yeah. Stereophonic's interesting.
If that's what I was going to say. That feels like the one where, obviously, everyone was expecting there to be some hugely amicable responses to it, including your own review. But others were less sold. I
wasn't alone, which I was slightly relieved about, because you sometimes think you've just lost your mind. But there were other critics who thought Stereophonic was 5-star worthy, and I absolutely do. And I think that is one of the shows of the summer. And I go round saying to people, go and see it, because my sense is that in New York, it did rely on word of mouth as well as on reviews. New York, the ecology is so different, but I think people picked up on Stereophonic late in its run, which is why I got to see it relatively early because there were tickets. I still think it is a masterpiece, and I wonder if something goes slightly wrong, that people think it's a play about music, and it is about music. Have you seen it now?
No, not yet.
Oh,
I'm still failing.
Such a treat ahead of you.
Despite your best efforts, yeah.
Yeah,
no,
you have to go.
Yeah.
It is a play about music, and it's about what it takes to be in a band and what it takes to make art. But it's really about what it takes to make relationships, what it takes to be a person. And I think maybe people expect that the song is like a play with songs, whereas the songs only exist to support the story. And it's incredibly original and unique, and I do absolutely love it still. I think I have gone soft. I'm just loving everything.
Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's the heat. Thawing.
Hercules I didn't love. But even Hercules I didn't.
There was a lot to love in Hercules. I'm not going to make the case to defend it, but you know, it's nice to see a family show getting audiences in over the summer, which I'm never going to knock in any form.
It is very good fun. You couldn't go and not have... Well, that was the other... Yeah. You couldn't go and not have a good time.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
It wears its flaws on its sleeve.
Yes,
I think that would be
exactly.
A nice way
That's
to put
a very
it.
nice way to put it.
Or not that he wears sleeves at any point in the show. Hercules, he's very much like... tank topped the whole way through. Yeah,
actually, costumes Hercules a bit old, but anyhow, that's another subject.
I feel like in this heady heat we have sort of like shown all our excitable levels, but I think we've run out of time for this week's episode of the What's on Stage podcast. We were planning to talk about other shows later this summer that might still claim that show of the summer moniker. However, listeners will have to wait another time to find out what might still be orbiting that list. But in the meantime, I think it's worth saying a goodbye from me, Alex Wood.
And a goodbye from me, very overexcited, Sarah Crompton.
Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment, rate the podcast wherever you can. We'll be back with regular episodes and a smattering of bonus episodes in between.